Welcome to the programme. Good to have you with us for today's programme. It is, of course, 1 year after Donald Trump was sworn into office for his second term. And in our programme today, we'll be focusing on the tumultuous, astonishing, dangerous year it has been. The 47th US president has transformed the United States and turned the wider world upside down. Well, there are simply so many facets to the Donald Trump presidency. On the international stage, he deliberately projects ambiguity and he approaches peace deals like business deals. He insults allies and displays utter contempt for international order. On the domestic front in the US, he has sent masked agents from ICE, that's the Illegal Immigration Enforcement Unit, to Democrat cities in the US in a dramatic implementation of his promise to deport illegal immigrants. He's also extended the reach of the presidency. He has packed institutions with loyalists. He's pursued enemies using the state apparatus and gone to war with academia and with the media. And he has openly blurred the line between personal financial gain and the office of the presidency. That is a lot. Well, joining me on set to discuss all this is Brody, who is a human rights lawyer and a former New York State Assistant Attorney General. He has decades of experience in international litigation and advocacy and has worked with the victims of some of the world's most brutal tyrants. Well, thank you for joining us here on set, Mr. Brody. Very good to have you with us. You know, where to begin? Such a lot has happened in 1 year. You famously predicted a lot of this in an article you wrote. Some of our readers can find it in Le Monde. You predicted how different Trump's second term might be to his first term. Tell us why it is so different.
Well, the first time he was elected, it was a surprise to everybody, but also to him. And so he came to the presidency really unprepared, without a program, and he surrounded himself by people from the Republican establishment. And they were able to kind of curtail his worst instincts, so that when he wanted to send troops onto the streets to put down the Black Lives Matter protest, his Secretary of Defense said, "No, Mr. President, you can't do that." When he tried to overturn the elections, his vice president, Mike Pence, said, "No, Mr. President, we can't do that." The Secretary of State of Georgia said, "No, I can't find you 12,000 votes." This time he had 4 years to think about this, to ruminate and to prepare. And this time, and of course, he was reelected despite having, despite the riots of January 6th. So he felt emboldened. And this time he had an army of people and a program ready to implement, from day one. And now, when we talk about sending troops to places, now he's chosen people like the Secretary of Defense, or the Secretary of War, as he likes to call himself, Peter Hegseth, who is not going to say, "No, Mr. President, you can't do it." These people are only chosen for their loyalty to the president, and they're not going to resign on principle, as many people did in the first term. And so all of the things that he said that he wanted to do in the first term, and that he said he was going to do. He sending troops onto the streets. He said he was going to do that. Using the Department of Justice to go after his political enemies. He said he was going to do that. Rounding up immigrants and deporting them. He said he was going to do that. So, many people didn't take him at his word. And of course, there was a lot of disillusionment with Joe Biden. But much of his program were things that he's wanted to do since his first term.
And I remember in the campaign, there were people who said, Donald Trump says he's going to do this, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt. And they very much appeared to rely on those checks and balances, the Supreme Court, Congress. Why are they proving so ineffective in curtailing Donald Trump's activities?
Well, I think that's been a big story of the first term, of this term, is the failure of those traditional counterweights. I mean, we have a Congress which is totally silent. I mean, you basically, because of his total control over the Republican Party. Congress has not played its role. You know, the founding fathers expected that the founding fathers who had come out of the experience with the King of England had expected that if somebody behaved like a king, Congress would step in and exercise its prerogatives. But when you have a president who totally controls the party that controls Congress, that doesn't happen. The Supreme Court has been, manipulated by previous Republican Congresses, so that there's a 6-3 built-in majority. What we're seeing as well in the media, I mean, we're learning in America how dangerous it is when when newspapers and television stations are owned by big conglomerates that have more important political and business interests. So, whether it's the Washington Post, which is owned by Amazon, or whether, just a few weeks ago, the 60 Minutes, the leading investigative program in the United States, pulled a segment on the Gulag in El Salvador to which immigrants are sent, because now CBS is owned by friends of Trump. And we're staring at the possibility that CNN will be owned by friends of Trump. So all of these traditional counterweights, and what we saw in the first, I would say, half year, 8 months, is everybody feeling like appeasement and flattery and giving Trump presents and telling him how great he was the way to deal with him. We're seeing that his appetite doesn't stop, with the first concession. I mean, universities who made one concession, law firms who made one concession, they're finding that they have to make more and more concessions. I have to say that I think that's changing. I just came back from 4 months in New York, and I feel that people are taking stock of what is happening. More and more people, I mean, obviously the election of Zoran Mandani in New York, which was a massive citizen kind of revolt, which had 100,000 people going door to door. On No King's Day, there were 7 million people out on the streets. We're seeing, there are hundreds of thousands of us who have whistles, to anti-ice whistles
to alert people
when
who might
ICE
be
is coming. And I'm kind of hoping that the tragedy in Minneapolis with the murder of Renee Good is an inflection point where people are even many MAGA people, even many Republicans are very uncomfortable with the deliberate cruelty of these armed and masked men on the streets of democratic cities.
You in just a few minutes there have outlined numerous ways in which Trump has flouted the normal way of doing things, and in many cases outright flouted the rule of law in the United States. If you had to pick one thing, you talked about controlling the media, controlling academia, packing institutions with Trump loyalists. We haven't yet mentioned the blurring of the lines between his own financial gain and the presidency. If you had to pick one area, what is it that worries you most about the way he operates?
I think the erosion of the rule of law, the erosion of checks. We talked about the masked ICE, heavily militarized soldiers, they're not actually soldiers, going on the streets of cities. But what they're talking about now is that these people have, according to the administration, absolute immunity. Now, that is not a concept in America.
J.D. Vance came out and said, whatever you do, you're immune.
That is fascism. The idea that you can't ask questions, the idea that people can kill with impunity. We are on a very, I think the only thing that separates us really from total fascism in the United States is resistance. resistance by people, resistance by cities, resistance by governors, resistance by neighbors, because this is a real, we are living a very dangerous moment in the United States.
And the Democrats during the campaign warned of that. They talked a lot. Some people said they should have spent more time talking about other issues and not these more abstract ideas of threat to democracy, threat to democratic institutions. Now that it appears to be happening in reality, do you think some of those who voted Trump are now worried by that? Before they tended to take it a pinch of salt. Do you think that more and more people are beginning to be worried by this?
I think so. I mean, the polls show that even Republicans, even people who are still in favor of Trump, are uncomfortable at the cruelty. I mean, maybe one of the things that is the worst here is how he has pitted Americans against Americans, how he has pitted people against their neighbors for his political gain, how he's sown division and hatred, and he doesn't see himself as president of all the Americans. I mean, he outright says that. He wishes the worst for his enemies. He deliberately and overtly takes funding away from Democratic states. He says that. He sends troops into Democratic-run cities. This idea that, of just a total breakdown of a civil discourse is, and I think it's worrisome to many people, even Republicans. I mean, obviously, there is, and people who watch Fox News, who watch the right-wing programs, are getting a very different version of what's happening. But look, 80% of Americans watch that video of Renee Good. They can see with their own eyes what happened. And when Trump and Pam Bondi, who was only put there because she was his personal lawyer, come out and say, tell people that what they saw is not real. It's kind of like when the Democrats were all saying, no, Joe Biden, he's okay. But people can see. I mean, Americans maybe are not as educated as they should be. Maybe they don't get the best information they could. But there's certain point you can't fool all the people all the time.
Just to push back on a couple of points you've made there, the Trump trying to control the media and academic institutions. I've spoken to Trump supporters who say, hang on, don't pretend that before the media and academic institutions were places of free speech. There was much too much cancelling and throttling of people's real opinions. On the ICE implementation, the very heavy-handed implementation of trying to get illegal immigrants out, people say, well, how do you do it? What would you say to people who make those criticisms?
Well, those are very different issues. Certainly, I mean, academic freedom is a bedrock of free speech, of American society. I mean, we know, J.D. Vance before, years ago said we have to go after the universities. I mean, it is an attempt to, attack freedom of thought. Now, certainly, I mean, you have progressive universities, and you have less, and you have conservative universities. In terms of immigration, obviously, one of the reasons that Trump was elected was this feeling that there was chaos at the border. But I don't think anybody, I have gone, every 2 weeks when I was in New York, I went with immigrants to immigration court. I walked them past masked, iced men standing in the hallways. Now, the people I was talking to, these were people who came to America for the same reason my parents came to America, for the same reason Donald Trump's grandparents came to America, for freedom and for a better life. These are not people looking for a handout. Okay, there needs to be control of immigration, but the deliberate cruelty with which it is being done, the demonstrative cruelty, is something that I think appalls almost all Americans.
You're going to stay with us, Reed Brody, but we were going to take a look now. We're going to take a look at some of the foreign policy initiatives under Trump. Let's get a sense of those with the actions abroad. And tensions have been building, of course, for months between the European Union and the US. Trump has had a seemingly warm face to face encounters with some European leaders, but he's also been very vocal in his criticism of Europe. Charlotte Hughes has the story.
It's a message that appears to ramp up tensions over Greenland between Washington and some of its closest allies. Over the weekend, Donald Trump sent this text to Norway's Prime Minister.
Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland.
As well as his ominous remarks, the US president has threatened several European countries with tariffs in his bid to wrest sovereignty over Greenland. When he's met with certain European leaders in the past, Trump has struck a warmer tone.
She's become a friend, and we really have a great relationship.
In this interview, though, Trump did not hold back in his criticism of Europe.
I think they're weak, but I also think that they want to be so politically correct. I think they don't know what to do.
So how does Trump want Europe to behave? This analyst explains his theory.
What the White House wants to do is to replace the current European elites with whom they don't think they can work. Elites who they view as liberal both left and right, with other European elites who are nationalist populists aligned with their agenda.
US Vice President J.D. Vance has voiced multiple criticisms of Europe.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
According to this analyst, Washington is hoping for a certain outcome in the 2027 French presidential election.
France was criticised during Marine Le Pen's first trial, and we're expecting criticism during the appeal trial.
Here in West Virginia, some 70% of residents voted for Trump in the 2024 election. Some support his stance on Europe.
Europe has kind of lost its way, in my opinion, for the most part. It's like woke, like extremely woke, which is problematic.
Others are more critical of the US president.
Europeans as our partners. I don't think that we need to have any enemies in Europe.
You just don't take over Greenland. I mean, please.
According to a CNN poll, 75% of Americans are opposed to the US trying to take control of Greenland.
So, Reid Brody, that was a quick look at some of the action on the international stage. You know, might is right, insulting allies. How should the outside world handle Donald Trump? You can't handle the whole world. How should Europe handle Donald Trump?
I think Europe needs to stand up to Donald Trump. I mean, what we've seen in the United States is that Trump pushes and pushes, and he will do what he says unless he is met with force, with an equal force. And then he can back down. I mean, the Trump always chickens out when he's met with force. And I think, internationally, we see that, he tried to impose huge tariffs on Brazil because of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Lula stood up to him and he backed down. China stood up to him and he backed down. Europe has been, trying to flatter him and appease him. I mean, the trade deal in which they agreed to 15% tariffs in exchange for nothing was humiliating. And Trump sees that. He sees weakness and he pushes. And I think Greenland may be, in a sense, the international equivalent of the killing of Rene Good. It's the moment when Europeans see that appeasement and flattery doesn't work with Donald Trump.
And of the range of options Europe has, what sort of leverage should it use to stand up to Donald Trump?
I think, we've talked in Europe, I hear a lot talk about the anti-coercion bazooka, taking retaliation against American companies, which, need to be regulated anyway, because, Trump is trying to prevent Europe from regulating the digital companies in ways that protect European social welfare. So I think it's a double benefit to Europe to use these anti-coercion measures. I think Europe needs to show it needs to become autonomous in terms of defense. Not to rely, I mean, clearly a lot of the pandering that Europe is doing is because they want to keep the United States on side for the protection of Ukraine. Europe should be able to protect Europe fully. And Europe needs to stand for international law. I mean, it should have stood for international law in Venezuela, which it did not. It should be standing for international law in Gaza, which it has not.
Doesn't it have to pick its battles? You know, Venezuela.
No, I don't.
Americana.
You know, you're either for international law or you're against it. I mean, double standards is precisely what undermines international law. You know, you can't say, okay, we agree that Trump bombed Iran because we don't like the Ayatollahs, and we agree that he took out Maduro because we don't like Maduro. But here, when it comes to our hide, we care about international law. No, I mean, I think that, the United Nations was established in 60, 80 years ago, in order to save the world from the scourge of war. And it's actually done a pretty good job with the basic rules that you can't invade another country just because you want to. And, that rule should apply to, I mean, as somebody who's worked with victims of brutal regimes all over the world, I'm very happy to see Nicolas Maduro in handcuffs, but not this way.
We don't have a lot of time. Time for one more question, though. This Board of Peace, which on Friday, when it was announced, people thought it was, as it had been in the beginning, to oversee the transition in Gaza to stability, to proper governance. It is now, it seems, morphing into something which might undermine the United Nations, where Trump would have a veto, where you'd have to pay to join up. Macron has said, no, thank you. What do you make of this?
Good for Macron. I mean, Trump wants to replace the United Nations with Trump. He'll put his name on the building. He'll put his name on Greenland. He'll put his name on the building. The United Nations needs to be reformed. The Security Council composition is outdated. But, just let's not hand over the keys to the world to Donald Trump, please.
Good place to end. Thank you so much, Reid Brody, for your time. We really do appreciate it. Great to hear your insights on all of that. Reid Brody there.